Hey, y'all, it's Dr. Know It All. Today, I am super excited to be talking with Joe Justice, whose resume is honestly so full of stuff that I'm only going to hit a few highlights. Maybe you'll touch on a few more today. Anyway, he is the CEO of Wikispeed, which holds 4 speed records. He has worked or consulted with a ton of companies, including Microsoft, Amazon, Toyota, and very famously, Tesla. He is the author of Scrum Master and a couple of agile children's books, which really blew me away when I went and looked it up. I was like, what is it? Good Night Nut, Good Night Bolt or something? I think that's awesome. Anyway, I will put that stuff in the description in case you want to go check those out because they're great. And he is the chair of the Agile Business Institute. So welcome, Joe, and thank you so much. Also, I forgot to say in this little description, you are like one of the nicest people that I've ever known on the internet. And I think it's true in reality too. So there we go. So welcome.
You're amazing, John. You're amazing. If I can live up to 1% of what you just chose to share, this will be a charming interview. So I will.
Man, I told my wife, I was like, I'm scared to interview this guy. He's kind of blowing my mind because he just does so much stuff. So anyway, I don't know if you wanted to talk about other stuff, but I actually wanted to start with your I think it's 2011 TEDx talk, right? So just about a decade ago. And of course I'll put that link in the description as well, but it felt to me like at that point you gave away the keys to the kingdom. It's like a 9-minute talk, and you basically said, this is how to do agile, this is how to build cars, this is how to do all the stuff that everyone should have been listening to. And it felt like Tesla either was already doing this or was the only one who actually listened to you.
In 2010, that's when I first that I know of, that I first met the Tesla team or a significant part of it. And that was during an event to try to make ultra efficient cars, a large sponsored contest, which the TEDx talk is about. So if you watch that during those proceedings is when I first met the Tesla team. They were trying to make the Roadster work at the time. I mean, it was functioning, but they were trying to make it much better. Musk has since apologized to early Roadster owners, saying, yes, it was a beta. And everyone was trying to figure out new tech at that time. And that's when I first talked to and collaborated with some of the Tesla team. And just before making the TEDx talk is when I was saying, look, Tesla team, you need more modularity. And we were looking at the early versions of the Model S frame or chassis, which not everybody knows, that was largely engineered by Daimler, Mercedes-Benz. And so it looks a lot like a Daimler product and had a lot of input from Bosch. And Bosch still supplies to Tesla. The steering rack, for example, for the Model S is a Bosch part. So it was very German automotive engineering, very heavy, very big, but it had some Tesla breakthroughs. The battery pack wasn't yet a structural element, but the idea that there was a battery pack and you didn't have all this space consumed by an engine area. And so the firewall, as you'd call it, because you used to have a burning gasoline thing at your feet. So you have a firewall. Like, this is how crazy this is, right? When you think about how barbaric actually internal combustion vehicles are. A firewall, because there is a fire right there, is actually quite far back in internal combustion engines, especially German ones, the way they configure the engine. Well, the firewalls moved way forward, which for the Daimler engineers was radical, right? It was so different. Yeah. And I was saying, I was recommending more modularity for more parallel execution. And that happened. It was introduced to the S and X even more now with Plaid. The 3 and Y have far more modularity, especially in the chassis and frame. It's more like a bunch of toy pieces that fit together. And then I did the TED talk, and I agree. I still look back and think that was a product of an interesting time, and a lot of the information that I was able to share there holds up very well now.
Right.
But that said, I don't want to take credit. There was a zeitgeist at the moment where modularity in software was being better understood. And I was immersed in that. And I happened to have an automotive company at the same time. So being part of the conversations that became the book Lean Startup, and part of the conversations that became the book Scrumban, neither of which I wrote, but I was talking to both those authors as those books were written every week. And the book Personal Kanban by Jim Benson, which is underrated and is awesome.
Cool. I actually don't know that one, so I'll have to go look that up. So yeah.
It's,
See, I learned something new already.
oh, John, you are a wonderful human being. And looking behind you, I see we have almost all the same hobbies, which is even more cool. I think we could be really good friends.
Yeah, actually, honestly, and I don't know. I know that you have a black belt in which martial art is it?
It's a Chinese martial art, Kung Fu.
Okay, Kung Fu. Yeah, I actually have a third-degree black belt in Taekwondo. So,
Epic.
yeah,
That
I
is
have not
discipline.
practiced in many years just because I've been so busy, but I do have it, so it's kind of cool. But anyway, so that as soon as I heard that, that was honestly the thing. I was like, okay, I got to talk to Joe. Like, we have connections outside of just the interest areas, um, and so I was actually going to ask you about Elon borrowing things from you, but it sounds like actually you were, collaborating with him at the time. But I actually am going to jump ahead because I really wanted to talk to you about the whole mind body philosophy that you have. And I will explain a little bit of this. So I'm in my mid 50s. I'm very old. For a long
Not even
time,
halfway, my friend. Not even halfway.
there we go. Hopefully, we can get technology to catch up with all that. But for a long time in my life, gosh, probably into my mid 30s, I would sneak off to the gym or I would sneak off to go surfing or something like that. And it wasn't really until I moved to Southern California and realized that there was a culture that was accepting of the fact that you could work really hard, but then it was okay to go do something that was, not, just sitting around watching TV or whatever, but, it was okay to do something active and different. And honestly, most of the best ideas I ever get in my life are out while I'm biking or at the gym or something, right? You're doing something mindless, your body is working and your brain is just ticking along. So anyway, tell me what you think about all that. That's my story.
Man, I think John, I completely agree. And there's a lot of corporate cultures, particularly top-down command control ones, where they view you as a contribution and not a holistic thing to be loved, right? That don't want you to go to the gym, that don't want you to go for a bike ride, because that means you're not focused on their problem. Because you to them are a utilization sheet. And that happens a lot. Not all the time, luckily, right? But it really does happen. And it's just disrespectful of people. And it makes people disengaged and unhealthy. And I don't want to be a part of it if I can help it. Now, there is a time of urgency. That is a thing that exists. There are times of urgency where there is one single priority and you only sleep when you have to, and you go at it. That's not sustainable pace in a healthy, loving way. Right. And if that's the society that scales out among the stars, that's not the one I want, right? So what's the society that scales out among the stars? It's super fast, super collaborative, super hardworking, but people are healthy. They can take care of their emotions. They can take care of each other. They have Slack to help someone who's sick or injured or needs help. They have time for beauty, for art, to help make themselves beautiful, to help make each other loving and beautiful. That is a society that is worth scaling out among the stars. And it has to also be hyper-productive, or it will be eaten by the more productive one, right? So how to be stylish, beautiful, loving, kind, balanced, and incredibly fast at innovation. And I think there's a shot at it. I think it's a real possible thing. And at times it even seems to exist in some of the Musk companies. And that is actually more in line with my personal mission and probably like yours. And I'd like to sum up this piece by saying, if your job doesn't leave you with enough time to not be tired and still go to the gym, your job is broken.
Okay. I'll agree with that. And I would actually just do a yes and to that, which is that there are times that you just have to pile in and, it might be a week or two or whatever, where you're just working. But if you have that physical capacity, you don't have to be an Olympic athlete, but if you just have good physical conditioning, it actually allows you to do that and perform well without just collapsing, right? So you can actually manage to push yourself. So, ultimately these companies should be looking at that. They're like, hey, we get a better employee out of this if we take better care of them as a holistic person. So I really like that. That's great.
Longer term return on investment horizon corrects for a lot of problems. a short-term return on investment horizon creates a lot of problems. And Musk is the longest game player I know of with big money today. Musk is looking more than 1,000 years out. And this really frustrates investors. Institutional investors get really angry at Musk practices. And this is related to why Musk was kicked out of PayPal, was forced to sell early. And Musk made a ton of money. But Musk was trying to X.com, PayPal. What Doge is now is a very natural continuation of one of the many goals Musk was already moving towards with PayPal. And the investors were saying, look, we don't want to wait another day for our payout, for our big payout. So let's cut and run. And Musk was saying, but you miss out on the larger narrative of making the world a better place, which will make more money. It just takes longer. And look what happened with Tesla. I mean, he could have cut and run many, many times, and it keeps compounding in value, and it will continue to do so because Musk plays a long game like a tree ant.
Yeah. So I want to touch on this. Just, were you being hyperbolic when you said he thinks 1,000 years out, or is that honestly the truth?
That's full on correct. Now, the problem is no one has a detailed view. So you're thinking in terms of first principles when you're looking 1,000 years out. So that works. First principles thinking is compatible with very large chunks of time. Physics is very compatible with thinking of very large chunks of time. For day-to-day tactical, it's about response and awareness, and fact-checking is difficult. And this is part of why Musk is pushing for any type of useful fact-checking and prefers non-branded media over branded media, because there is still an agenda. There's always an agenda, but the randomness of unbranded media's agenda allows more truth to emerge. So Musk doesn't do branded interviews almost ever. They're usually with an engineer with a YouTube channel, and they have a topical conversation. And that engineer has their biases just as anyone, but the randomness of the biases from the different unbranded interviews coalesce to create a more truthful picture. That's for near-term decision-making purpose. Because what you want is a lot of fact to say, what do I do this second, right? Where is the bottleneck? So you want a lot of fact. For 1,000 years, which is absolutely the timeline of Musk's companies. That's the ROA timeline. That is done with physics and first principles, because that's all you got.
Gotcha. Wow, that alone is a huge revelation just from this interview, is that he's like thinking like that. I mean, gosh, I don't know how to transition to this, because I actually really wanted to ask you. Well, I'm just going to take a tangent for a moment. We're going to step aside. I want to talk about you, because a lot of what you talk about is social good. And I know building an electric car, or even a car back in the day that got 100 miles per gallon or something, is a social good, but it sounds like there are other things that you are doing as well. And I mean, you can talk about specifics if you want, but why is social good so important to you as a human?
Oh, John, you're hitting the big ones and topics that a lot of people want to avoid, right?
I'm not that kind of guy.
You are awesome. I think. Thank you, John. How to say it? It's super clear, but how to distill it into just a few words. I have a very clear feeling of right action. And so I like to sit on the beach and drink Mai Tais like anyone else, but I then think, what could I have done with that time? And very naturally to me, life comes as a segment on a much larger timeline. And often, I think a lot of people do, I hope a lot of people do, I definitely do. I actually often observe whatever action Joe is doing from up above as a larger system. And the further zoomed out it is, usually the better my choices. And the happier I am. And if I'm zoomed out and there's another person sitting on the beach having Mai Tais, I'm not particularly grateful for any of those people on the beach having Mai Tais. That's cool. Please do that. but I'm not particularly grateful. I'm grateful for people that are doing certain good things that improve this larger picture. And that may have come, I was born essentially blind. I could only see by touching my nose I learned to read by actually, my nose was touching the paper, the book. And I learned to write that way, like this. And so very naturally, I'm holding a pencil, usually when I was a little kid, with my nose touching. So I was writing like this, which gives me kind of a weird hand holding position. I don't hold a pencil or pen the way a lot of people have been trained to. But what that also did is when I was learning to draw something, I would hold like a root, from a weed, like a dandelion, or a toy car. And I'd be bored quickly of a toy car that didn't have a lot of detail, because I'd hold it this close and I would draw these things. So I found a lot of my earlier drawings when I was a tiny little kid, and it's the inner veins of a leaf, because actually what was wrong with my eyes is they were slightly magnified. So it was like a magnifying glass. I've had many eye surgeries since then and eye training, and now I see pretty much like usual people, average. But there's these drawings, and it's like a little kid's version of drawing, like looking at a plant's roots under a magnifying glass. And I think that may have been something that affected my perspective during periods of neural growth, like young age, like around 7 and before age 7, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So often I've used zoomed out, and I actually don't use my eyes as often as some people do. And I'm actually a little clumsy. This is what the martial arts helped a lot, is being less clumsy, because I would often hit a door jam and I'd walk through. I'm actually viewing zoomed out, not really using my eyes as much.
I used to get beat up. And I didn't do it to beat people up. I did it to make I call myself a lobster. I created a really hard outer shell so the squishy insides wouldn't get hurt.
John, that's such a lovely reason.
It was tough growing up in Cleveland in the 1970s. It was a brutal environment, especially for a nerdy kid. This is something, all you youngsters out there watching right now, it's cool to be a nerd and a geek now. Oh my gosh, it was not when I was growing up. So you learn to cover that stuff up, which is, nothing like being blind. But I'm saying, we all have our roadblocks in life, and they determine a lot of who we are. I love the idea that your life is kind of macroscopic, that you're like a macro lens, that you're like looking super close at this stuff. That's very, very cool.
I love that you've got a lobster shell. And you can love and hold and not have to suppress the soft squishy, because it's protected. Right. Love that.
That's part of that whole self-confidence thing. Like I said, I used to sneak to the gym because I was embarrassed to admit to anybody that I wasn't working 24 hours a day, that kind of thing. So,
which is interesting, because growing up in 80s in South Bend, Indiana, it was an extremely macho sports culture. This is when all the men in media were massive steroid users, not to be admitted to for decades later. So you have Rambo, you have the Terminator, you have Predator. Like, these are who you're supposed to be, right? And then just a little bit later, you get the Chicago Bulls. So you're supposed to be an amazing athlete. Pele,
super jacked up.
Unnaturally so, right? But we didn't know that, or at least it wasn't publicized until decades later, that it was steroid use, massive, and early steroids where they were really toxic. Man, my heart goes out to those actors and actresses that had no choice really to be competitive at the time, and some of the athletes. But in any case, like, it's not so different, right? You're told you need to be this perception, that fit in this mold, and yet today it's super different. Mining Doge or exchanging NFTs from your phone in a 1-bedroom condo is success, right?
Yeah, exactly.
with the laundry machine running next to you, and a bunch of solar panels on top, so your power bill is offset from all the mining. Like, that is success. Like, Oh, you're a good date.
Yeah, that was not the case. Well, it sounds like, South Bend, Indiana and Cleveland, Ohio, not that different from each other. So, but yeah, that's really fascinating. So I guess I kind of want to talk about Tesla, but I think it actually works into that because what you were saying about respecting the differences, and it's not, there's kind of this, I don't know, what do you call it, virtue speak about just saying like, oh, respect everyone's differences. But what I'm talking about is a more specific example. In Tesla, it really seems like what they're doing is not saying you've been hired into HR as the person who reads resumes, and that's all you're ever going to do at this company. And if you're lucky, you'll become a manager someday of that particular thing. That's not Tesla. It's like if you're doing it and something else is like, ooh, that's cool, go do it. Do your thing, man.
In seconds, well, legitimately seconds, right. Less than a minute. The speed of self reassignment, if you want to, is, I've never seen it higher. Except in my own company, except in Wikispeed. And I actually am shy to say that because it makes it sound self-inflating. But Wikispeed really was an interesting phenomenon, and it still in a very small way continues. Some people are still absolutely doing Wikispeed every Thursday all around the world.
That's cool.
But it's a lot smaller than it was.
Right.
When we were making road legal cars, it was a much larger effort. Tesla does that with over 100,000 people. And they do a lot of stuff.
That's the part that's like, it's one thing to think, okay, 10 people working together, yeah. But when you multiply that by several orders of magnitude, it just becomes incredibly difficult to imagine.
A lot of people think as you get larger, the engagement has to die, the dream has to die, and you have to fall into line. And you need hierarchy to keep reins on things when you're big. And you need a ladder to climb then. A lot of people think so. And Elon Musk, across all of Elon's companies, have proven that to be completely false. But what it does seem to require is no budgeting. And right. The owner works the trenches. And a lot of companies are investments or vehicles for investments primarily. So you don't have the people who are funding it work the trenches. Volkswagen, a great example. Both are publicly traded, Tesla and Volkswagen. But if you want to make a 3 million euro allocation in Volkswagen, that's a board level approval. So you have to wait for the next board meeting. In Tesla, right. You do it right now because Elon says you can. And Elon is the majority owner. So Elon said there is a board, but you don't have to wait for the board to execute any level of financial spend. So that changes the autonomy. Then the flatness, the person who's paying for it all, Elon, works with you, whoever you are. Elon just moves all around and works everywhere, doing what you're doing. So you don't have to make reports to them. They understand. You don't have to have a meeting to get their time. They're there. In fact, Elon doesn't do meetings. So the only way you talk to Elon is to work with Elon on something. That is right. A meeting, right? So the company is flat and has.
I would love that. I hate meetings. So yeah, so it's an active. I mean, if you're having a meeting, it's an active meeting. It's like, hey, we're working on this particular part, and he's just like working on it with you or something, and so you're talking about it, and as you go.
I never attended any meeting or even saw one ever. Okay. When I was in Tesla. Now there's people working and you will talk while working or communicate. Sometimes it's loud, so you'll text even though you're with each other. So right. You have to be really concise. I think this is part of why Musk is good at Twitter. I mean, that's how you actually communicate in Tesla.
Very short and to the point. So, wow. So one of the things, and I think it was actually the Best in Tesla interview, but you were talking about something and I realized what you were talking about. I'm a software guy, much more than a hardware guy. You were talking about the explore, exploit kind of machine learning algorithm, the self-optimization. And So just, I mean, I'll try to contextualize this a little bit just for the general audience in case you don't know. But what that is I don't know, imagine you're going to the New World. And so the first person is like, I don't know, Columbus. I know he's politically, not the right guy. But anyway, so, comes from Portugal, goes to the West Indies or whatever. He's exploring. And then after that comes these people who start to exploit the new land, the new Europeans that come in. So that's kind of a negative example of that. But in machine learning, that's hugely important because you have to define where you are. And I have to admit that I personally am much more of an explorer person than an exploit person. As soon as I really understand something, I'm a great researcher, but as soon as I understand it, I'm like, that's not interesting anymore. I'm going to do something else. So, but anyway, so talk about that at Tesla specifically. I think that's an amazing thing to think about, a software paradigm and a machine learning, pretty modern machine learning software paradigm applied to more or less hardware.
There's a third piece to explore exploit that is rarely stated. It's assumed to be known, and I think it's often not known. So if you'll allow me, let's start there. And that is, what's the value to exploit? And that continuously evolves and is reevaluated with actually very intentionally. So there are to-do items to check. Does value still mean what we thought it meant? Do we need to update what is value? And this is what prevents the downside that many people would call over exploitation, or even just the word exploitation. So right. You get the value while preserving as many of the other values because you're trying to look at net value. So if you have complete and total harvest, like clear-cut harvesting, your value over time is reduced. So when you first arrive, maybe you want to harvest one of whatever it is, one of these trees, to understand how does harvesting even work here. So you do that immediately. Right. Well, very soon, if you're also reevaluating value, you're starting to say, over time, we should not be taking more than one out of this area. And we also need to check what our roads are doing in terms of the communication pathways of the supporting organisms, bug traffic, et cetera. We probably want to institute some level of fire control because we've just removed some of the level of fire control that was naturally happening here, et cetera. And you start to look at the whole value. Now that value is discovered only by starting exploitation. So you start with exploit, but then part of the exploit algorithm is value check and redefining value. So with that known, with that understood, you start to have a more potentially positive outcome that actually grows over time as you understand what positive is. And it allows you to make progress. That's widely, it allows progress to not be universally vilified, right?
Yes.
And of course, paradise. Oh, sorry, John. Yeah.
No, it's fine. I was just thinking it's so sad that both of us have we both came up with analogies that are somewhat negative. They have negative connotations. It's like clear cutting forests and taking over new lands and stuff. It's like, sorry. But I think in my mind, it came out of the idea of the cellular or modular, not production line, production cells, I guess is the best way to put it, but that you can be going along. And if you are working on, I don't know, just a door, right? You want to, and maybe the door shape that's pretty locked in place, but let's just say it's a door shape. And so you pull a car off, you rework the shape. And if the panel gaps are less, or you can prove that the aerodynamic drag is less or something like that, as you said, that car just goes straight back into production and it goes out and somebody gets a very slightly better car. But then the interesting part about that, so that's the explore part. And then it's like, okay, that's better. Now you exploit. And then the interesting part is that you actually talked about, well, I guess the fourth aspect of this, because you do have to do the value analysis, but there's the greedy optimization, which in machine learning, again, you always talk about that. You don't want to just wander around blindly. You want to try to go the best direction that you can. And greedy optimization, it's like, okay, this is a better thing. Can we make as many of these as possible and take over the world, right? The world of door manufacturing is now ours. We're like, oh. So in some ways it is a little bit like, European explorers just going in. But I think it's in a positive way because now what you've got is a slightly better door. And then somebody else is going to come along and build a slightly better door than that, and they're going to take over the world. So it's this weird little game that's so cool. Anyway, I know you've talked about this before, but I'm really curious, like, what other insights you have about that.
That is, maybe this helps a lot of people understand better. That is what is called the production ramp. The production ramp is scaling the exploit. And when a lot of people just don't seem to understand this outside, that never ends ever, right? So it's not like there's a predicted output and Tesla stops there, or SpaceX or Neuralink or Starlink. No, they've reached that goal. So now the to-do list is almost 100% value seeking. So the next exploit tunes, it never ends. Whereas when you have multi-year budgeting, you plan your exploits based on the known values today, which is what's called waterfall. So it delays innovation. In fact, it actually blocks future innovation because your resources are prevented from changing course due to your budget that you've made. So exploit cycle is the production ramp. It never ends. And by mixing in from the same people, value checking and value hunting, the explore part continues. And we can use another useful analogy, and I don't even see it as an analogy. I view it as the same thing. And that's gradient descent with random restarts. Right. So you've got a door and you're improving it. Well, there's random new cells, and actually humans are in charge of this randomness. There's some machine learning to aid you, but humans are pretty random anyway. So humans propose, should we even have doors? And you're allowed to do that in Tesla. You just set up in your own little area and you start running a set of experiments. Now, your cost to run whatever you're doing is visible to you and everybody else. And the value to the company is visible to you and everybody else. So if you don't deliver value before you feel too embarrassed to continue, or other people will come and say, look, this is not working out.
So there's an explore time and budget, not budget, but there's an explore, like there's a world of exploration, but it's limited. You can't keep going for 2 years on something, that's just not going to get anywhere. Yeah.
This will sound insane, and probably we'll get some comments say, yeah, Joe just was wrong at this point. But I'll say it, this is true. The guideline is 20 minutes, show value in less than 20 minutes.
I can't even do that in software.
Well, I mean, bear in mind, you have a tremendous amount of robots and scripts helping you at design time, at execution time, at test time. So there's a lot of experiments you can run really quickly because you have this infrastructure that's built up over time that continues to be improved. And many of those systems they're refreshed continuously. Often you're involved in that refresh. So you're familiar with the system. So your level of intimacy is very high because there's few things that are very old. You've instituted the new test fixture, or you were part of it. So you know how to tweak it to try this new thing because you're intimate with it. Then the modularity allows you to have a finite boundary, and it's much easier for humans to think. And the ripple effect is what confuses and makes very challenging most large projects. Well, how does this affect the next downstream system? What's the stack up? Well, you want to limit the stack up to reduce cognitive complexity. So it's easier for you to think, as long as I don't change this set of inputs and this set of outputs, I can do whatever I want in here. In 20 minutes, how do I make this more awesome? And you pounce. So the infrastructure helps. And it was not 20 minutes originally. When I was first talking to Tesla folks in 2010, it took longer because that level of modularity, those automated systems were not existing yet. Those compound.
Right. Okay. That makes good sense, but that is still like, and I, even as a software person, I'm like, boy, you could really learn a lot from the idea of extreme modularity in software. So that you're not just having these little subroutines, but you have subroutines inside subroutines. And so everything is just like Legos. It's just like, pop this one out, plug this one in, see if it works better. Yeah, that's cool. And that I start to see how you could do it rapidly that way. So that's one of the, I wanted to ask you about continuous ramping, but I think this is more for everybody else out there. It's a never, like you said, it's a never ending process. There's always some other team that's working on trying to improve whatever the hell it is that you're working on improving at the same time. So it's just this compounding thing. Yeah. Okay.
And no one wins, right? So you can have, and in fact, you do. There are many parallel lines actually making, well, lines, cells. We do still call them lines. We call them pilot lines, but they're not linear. So we use the industry term line, but it's not a line. It should probably be changed to agile circles or something. The factory, if you look at it, it really looks like in how the inputs and outputs move. It really looks more like the game of Risk with like hexagonal tiles. That's really how it is. And then there's no line, and no one wants a line because then change is too expensive because you have a ripple effect. Right? But there are many of those at once making different versions all the time. So many companies have a problem where innovation is bottlenecked by two or more personalities vying to be chosen for their design to be chosen. And if you're not chosen, it's shameful. You often miss the next promotion. Your design was for nothing. So how does that work in Tesla, where you have dozens of simultaneous execution paths? First, there's no promotion ladder, and that solves for a lot of problems. Right. It just, an enormous amount of politics are disarmed because of that, which is cool. And second, everyone has visibility, so you couldn't cover something up. Like it's visible to everyone, everywhere, all the time. So when you assume transparency and you know it's difficult to vie for another position because there are almost no positions, very nearly 100% flat. Like basically all you can have, all that's left are good actors. And the fact that there's no waterfall budget planning to say, as of this date, we've decided this is the version, the other ones are stopped. It's simply which is a more efficient path to value. So you never have to stop anything. In fact, often you don't, unless something is less valuable, significantly so. Otherwise, the extra capacity is so valuable. Many people ask, does Tesla really have different suppliers for batteries? Yes, it's the same idea. More batteries are good. It's not like this battery is 0.2% better in this thermal range, so we're only going to use this battery. Sure, if you have infinite production capacity, but that's not the way the real world works. So instead, it's, yes, this one is 0.2% worse in this thermal range. We'll take as many of them as you can.
Right. And then you, of course, software limited a little bit, so everything stays within the range of what all the batteries are happy with. So yeah. I want to circle back for just a second because I'm a designer and I also teach design. And one of the things I talk about with design is, I mean, I'll just throw out a ridiculous example. It's like someone says, okay, I need a set for this play. And 3 months later, you show up with a completed set that's on stage. You know, they say you have a budget of $15,000 to do it, and you show up with a set and the director goes like, what the hell is that? What you're talking about, and that's more like a traditional car design kind of thing. What you're talking about is what actually happens in designs, which is that you spend as little time as possible coming up with the ideas. So like live sketches, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, you just sketch out ideas, then you get feedback, like that instant feedback. It's like, no, that's never going to work, you know? So you work your way into it rather than just thinking like, oh my gosh, 7 years from now, we have to have this thing. It just becomes, well, complex, ripple effects, mind-bogglingly difficult to project what 7 years from now is going to be like, you know? So, okay, it helps. It may not help you explain that to anybody outside of the design world, but it helps explain it a lot to me. It's reducing that. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the heart. It's reducing the, I call it, don't get married to your work at the beginning. Right. So that's the thing. You can also get rid of a lot of politics where people aren't like, oh my gosh, I've spent, 6 months on this project, and if it doesn't get picked, I'm screwed. It's like, nah, I spent 20 minutes, whatever. I'll go on and do something else. So, yeah. Cool.
The concept of something like universal basic income helps here. And if anyone
Right.
wins, we all win. So the idea that almost everyone in all Musk companies makes about $20 an hour. So it doesn't matter if your idea was picked or not. It's not going to change any of your finances.
Right.
What will is the stock price. And the stock price is in some ways randomized by market forces. But
Right.
the core of it is excellent execution. And that's what stock price is supposed to be anchored by. And on a good day, it is. So
Right.
you're incented. You selfishly would make more money by simply trying to optimize the overall whole and for everyone else too. So you naturally think what's good for everybody. Or more naturally, and you can get psychopaths anywhere. I do love how Musk says out of 100 people, one is 100% gooder than everyone else, and one is 100% more evil. And when you have 100,000 people, you have a few really good people, and you have a few straight up psychopaths. And it's
Right.
true. That's just math. That's honest statistics. But in general, on the whole, the system is built such that most people put their best foot forward every day. It's a pretty good system.
All right. So self-organization, really, I know I'm keeping you for a long time here, but I do want to get into this because this was something I've been really interested in and haven't heard a lot, and only as much as you can talk about without violating NDAs. But I want to get in the weeds a little bit here because we're talking about self-organization and feedback, and it sounds like this is all based on basically what has become full self-driving, vision systems, behind it a machine learning system that's working, big TVs everywhere that give you like heat map information about what's happening, apps on your phone that allow you to interact with that information. I'm very curious, like, are we talking about like literal vision systems? So there's cameras that are saying like, there's a person there, there's a car part there. And how in the world does it determine if that car part, because part of this is this continuous testing, how does it know if that car part is better than the last one?
The machine learning stack is based on a value algorithm. What is valuable for this thing that's happening here, whatever this thing is. And what the ML system is essentially trying to do is be an expert craftsperson and assess the value of that thing. And an expert craftsperson, if they're unable to assess the value, you have a challenge, you have a problem. But many times an expert craftsperson has value criteria, and attempting to build an ML algorithm around that. Now, how does an expert craftsperson assess something? Sometimes they'll do it optically. Okay, vision will help there, especially for paint. What's the refraction quality like? What's the luster? Well, you can fully automate that. In fact, there's some things that are not public yet, but
in a broader sense, you could do it potentially better than a human being.
Far better. Because you measure at the photon level, and a human eye with very specific tooling can see half a wavelength of light. That is optically what humans can sense. And I was trained in that before going to Tesla by someone from the German Machinist Guild. And they were showing me how to optically flat level, like if you're going to bevel a mirror for satellites, how to do that with a mill. And that's something I learned, and it's cool. And you don't use, you start with a mirror and a white piece of paper. So it's not like you start with lasers, and this is something people did a long time ago when they would ground telescope mirrors and stuff. So you start with like a rough stone and you build up from there. But anyway, for a lot of industrial systems, a lot of all types of systems, sometimes you X-ray a system. So how do aircraft technicians test if the composites are of the quality you want? They use X-rays. That's one of the tests. There's also sounds. When you tap across composites, what's the sound profile that comes back? All of this ML does fine. ML does sound, vision, vibration super well. It's better than people. much better than people. So whatever an expert craftsperson could assess, the ML tries to do and eventually does better and instantly. And it doesn't get tired, it doesn't get cranky, and it doesn't play favorites.
And it doesn't need a coffee break, so yeah.
Well, really, the not playing favorites and not saying, I like you better, or we talk well. And that is very human, right? So you end up working with some people more still. It's not like Tesla's cracked that perfectly. Some people simply are easier for you to get along with so you can be more effective. You match, right? Well, the ML intentionally is trained to throw that data away. It's very intentionally clean about that.
Right.
And instead, it's for the amount of time you were just working on that thing, do we have less void area when X-rayed? Do we have superior weld penetration at a higher depth? Do we have more luster and more refraction angle for optical beauty? Is there less weight? Is the aerodynamic profile superior? And that's all balanced against what was the measured cost, all in OpEx and CapEx. That creates what I think is one of Tesla's current superpowers. It is absolutely based on the autopilot stack. And I'll call that digital self-management. There is not some boss in a command center watching cameras to determine quality. There are people watching their own feedback loop to increase their own value efficiency. And you don't get any promotion if you do it. That's just what you're supposed to do. And if you don't, you will notice, and other people will start to notice and come over and say, do you need help? Do you need training? Do you want to try a different area? Do you want to mob and swarm on a different team? So it's very loving. It's very supportive, but it's self-training.
Right.
Did I get to your point, John, or did I go too far in the
Yes, no. It actually answered it in a lot more. I was thinking so basically the value proposition, the loss function, if you want to call it that, you start off with domain-specific knowledge from experts in a field. You then rework that into, perhaps neural nets, but also it sounds like things like support vector machines or the old school stuff, A-star search, things like that you can encode that information into what could be very simple machine learning algorithms, and then they can go and do it on their own. And so but then in addition to that, do you have to run these things through an X-ray machine, or is there just sort of like the thing scanning? Okay, so there are specific areas that you can test it with, for example.
I think maybe more like your second one. The test fixtures, unless you're just starting something, in which case your goal is to make them. But the test fixtures are part of the process. So for example, Starship has this huge orbital welder, and it started back in the Falcon program. And originally you start immediately, you don't wait for a system. So people start in a tent welding metal, right?
I remember the early days of Starship where it looked like somebody would just slam panels up onto it. Yeah.
And Falcon too, a long time ago. You're on the dirt, right? Or maybe you lay a welding blanket down on the dirt and you just have a tent over you and you're welding, like with generators and tanks. Well, then you send it off to be X-rayed, because this thing you're going to send to Max Q. So you really want to know what was your weld quality all the way through. So that's slow. And SpaceX originally had multi-year sprints because that was the speed to design, analyze, build, test a rocket. Well, they put an X-ray machine on the welding machine, so it X-rays as it welds. So that barrel section never exits the orbital welder until it's fully validated, as validated as they could anywhere else. And SpaceX built their own X-ray machine and built it into the welding machine. So it also they ran ML on the weld, the X-ray of the weld as it's happening, which used to optimize the weld. And arguably, SpaceX has the best welding tech in the world now. and that's just when you do it every day at scale with a very high level of perception, and funnel that into machine learning run in Dojo and the cloud continuously, it never stops, you get some good insights.
Right.
And then that's the idea of something you could improve in 20 minutes. The ML stack says there's this opportunity in welding. And you say, well, I've been hand welding over here on this new one that's not yet in a roboticized fixture every day for 12 hours for the last maybe even 4 days. But your mind becomes so free of context switching when you've been immersed in something like that, maybe just 4 days. And you see this ML suggestion and you go, I know what to do, I think. I'll use the law of 2 feet. I'm going to go over, adjust this. I'm going to make a new weld nozzle in this shape and these 4 more nozzles this way, change the gas this way. So you're actually grinding some metal and you're filing some stuff, and you can get that done in 20 minutes.
Right.
And then the machine, it never stops running except for the moment for you to switch the components. And then the algorithm tells you for the downtime in your time, did it improve? Was that more efficient? And you go, yes. Wow, I'm a hero today.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you just then walk back to start welding in the dirt over there. I mean, this is a missed opportunity. I wish Tesla did have more congratulation moments, at least a ding sound from ML. And there's some of that, but it could be better. You could get more reward function. Because really now you're like, when Elon got a tweet saying you're now the wealthiest person on planet Earth, Elon's response was exactly Tesla. He's like, oh, interesting. Okay, back to work. Like that's it. That sums up exactly the success experience.
So, but that's the kind of thing, a little bit of UI work, just have your phone just push out a little like, great job, just something like that. So that's a simple thing to fix. So hey, there's the 20 minutes. Here's the 20-minute fix. There you go.
This is an opportunity. There's parts of the Musk companies that are the most fashionable experience I've ever had at work in any company, including working with fashion brands. There's some parts that are just ludicrously fashionable. And there's some parts that, I mean, when you start anything, you're in the dirt somewhere. So that's by definition. But there's some parts that they've even matured to a fairly high level that are still just brutal. It's safe. I mean, there's certain core tenets, but it's brutal and it's wearing. So there's a real opportunity, and Musk wants it. Musk is continuously pushing for these, but it's easy to get tunnel vision and be very stoic and say, well, that's not the main problem. We have an opportunity here. And that's true. But Musk really pushes to productize the factory. You should feel like you're in a ultra luxury fashion boutique at all times. And Musk pushes for that. But and parts of it are, but there's parts that got a long way to go. And and Musk wants it, but it's not there yet.
Yeah. And there's only even with 100,000 people, there's only a certain amount of resources that you can cast to these things. So that makes sense. That actually reminds me, I think it was Farzad, maybe he was talking with you about the bear skins and knives, that some stuff is so high tech, and other stuff, it literally is you in the dirt with an acetylene torch, just going like, and grinding little, stuff. So I kind of love that. It's very creative. You can do some creative stuff in the dirt, rolling around. So I assume that the answer is yes to this question, but I guess I should probably ask it. Is the machine learning system, the thing that's kind of at the heart of all this self-optimization, is that also continuously learning and improving?
Yes.
Like from the time you got there to the time you left, or stories? Yeah.
Changed many times, sometimes multiple times a day.
Okay.
But there's not one parent overarching system. I wish there were, or at least not that I experienced. If there were, that would be the product. And I think that is a dream, to have a system so good. But what it is per thing you're trying to do, there's an ML stack for that. And they use common tools, but they're often made by whoever walked up there first. So they're made in different ways. And the reason this is easy to see, very often, because these are highly visual, you shouldn't have to type almost ever. Right. I mean, even if you're coding software, you shouldn't have to type hardly ever. You have a lot of tools to assist you. So it's meant to be largely hands-free. So it's mostly visual. Built into these systems, there's often funny pictures of the people that were making it. So you can see these different people many of whom are still there, and they're already multimillionaires, but they just love the work, right? Through stock. And so you see, I don't know how, it's not like Tesla would care, but I want to be specific. They're quite funny. It's very meme driven, and sometimes there's just straight up memes. So you also can kind of sense the date of when this had a last major UI refresh, but often it's the people there, and they are a proxy for the visualization of things that are happening. And then there's a heat map overlaid. So it's really funny often. So this tells you this is a fairly unique stack, or at least has some elements that are specific to this area. So there's not one parent system. There's a library and there's tools to help you, but often it's whoever arrives and you take that. Now, that said, there is bearskins and knives, rocks and sticks, where you think, I've got a better idea for a door. Well, where is their room? This field over here. So you are in a field, like with weeds and stuff, and like badgers. And you're like, what can I do in the next 20 minutes that will help me? And you're like, okay, maybe this will actually take a week to get value, but I'm trying to think in 20 minutes increments. So you call Amazon and you order a fold-out shelter, a sun shelter. The cool thing about the mothership being in California is most of the year, you really can just work outside, but you want sun protection. So you can basically create a work area with a shade. So you start with that. Maybe you get 2 Conex containers dropped off. You drive the fork truck and you ask, hey, can I use, the robot I want is inside. Can I just use the Conex for a while? And you kind of get an, and you put it there and you put a tarp across and lash it down. So now you've got, your factory, and you are starting with nothing.
Right.
And part of what that does is it keeps the costs so low, because most of the super high-tech stuff that you use are made there, or you make them, or they're software that Tesla made. So the cost to deploy more of is essentially only time. And by reducing the cost to deploy the internally understood and made stuff, it becomes almost free to scale. Now, the novel stuff, often it's novel. So you've got to start from dirt. Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, wow. But that's really cool. But and like you said, nobody's getting paid outrageous salaries or anything. It's mostly in the stock. So even the time itself, it's not like someone's getting $1,000 an hour and you're like, holy crap, that's an expensive guy.
Right. And you don't have that ego to protect, I'm a very expensive person.
So I'm curious if there was something, like anything or nothing, if there was one thing you could change at Tesla, after your tenure there, what would that thing be?
There is a sense, maybe dread is too strong, but every morning, and Farzad agreed when we were talking, there's a sense that you are going off to war. Well, going off to war sounds more like the send-off party. No, more like squirming out of your foxhole again. You're in war, and you're returning to to be on point. Anything to understand the human factors of that and ease it is the one thing I would change. And it's amazing how loving and friendly almost everyone is almost all the time, given that part of the condition. It truly is a beautiful place to work. And that makes it much more sustainable than it might be otherwise, that and the mission. But there are many psychological factors that could be improved that conspire to make it often feel, okay, I'm going back in. Next line. We're on the next line. Really, it feels like I was just listening to Hardcore History's Battle of Iwo Jima. And
damn, I love Dan Carlin is the ultimate. I love him. Yes, go for it.
He's got this dramatic part when he does a first person, when he reads someone's letter, and then he talks in a fairly friendly, approachable way. But then when he's quoting someone, I mean, the Battle of Iwo Jima, I was not there, and kudos to the people that were. It sounded so similar. Both sides, all sides. I mean, you had Australians, you had Filipino conscripts. All players. Sounded very similar, minus the death, right?
Right.
Minus the death or even likelihood of death. Tesla is incredibly safe.
Right.
Minus the death, the work person like plodding along with the next second is what matters. Definitely no time to read or write a letter. I mean, most of the people I worked with at Tesla didn't know what their email address was. Most. Didn't
Wow.
know. There's no time for it. I think
Right.
a lot of people don't understand how fast it is.
Right.
So maybe that's a quotable drop that helps people get it. It's fast.
Right.
I ran a lot. Everyone
Right.
ran a lot, like with tools and robots and things and 20 kilograms. It's very kind. It's very loving. It's very safe. It feels a lot like war.
Right. And I heard people pee in garbage cans, and because you just can't take the 15 minutes to walk to the bathroom and back, that's too much time. So yeah. So now, I mean, right. I know there's people who are going to be like, oh, I fought in a war and this is totally different.
Yeah, no disrespect.
Right.
And
yeah,
no.
It's
the most similar description I've found.
Right. And I think what it is in a war, your life literally is on the line. But if you get into that psychological state where, the old primitive monkey brain is going like, holy crap, I'm about to get eaten by a tiger, it doesn't matter if it's really the case or if it's just you putting the psychological impetus on yourself. And so I could see that, not to take anything away from people. My grandfather actually fought at Iwo Jima, so holy crap, and listening to Dan Carlin, he never talked about it. A couple of stories, but listening to that entire series of the explosion in the East, it kind of brought tears to my eyes a bunch of times because I realized what his life was like during that period of time. But even disregarding the fact that we are not in any kind of mortal danger going to work, I understand when you get into those things where it's like, oh my God, it's like go, 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 go. You get into that mental frame where you're thinking the exact same thing.
It's easy for humans to do. In most companies, I mean, previous to Tesla and now again, I'm involved in what's called agile transformations, culture transformations, process restructuring of companies. And very often these companies, I mean, even nothing to do with manufacturing. I often am with manufacturing companies, but even like C-suite jobs, the level of fight or flight or stress is PTSD level. Many of these people have PTSD around the politics of the company. So humans gravitate toward this. It's easy for us to fall into that. And I don't think it's a failing. I think it's an opportunity to try to refactor the workplace to not play into that proclivity, that likelihood of humans to fall into the lizard brain fight or flight and all the stress that accompanies it, which is very natural for us. And I think for good reason. So approaching that, and right now, there is nothing remotely close to the speed of a Musk company at innovation and the pace of it over time, sustaining it even, nothing. So if nothing else changed, that is the culture that would scale across the stars, that would expand consciousness among the stars. I think that's a missed opportunity. How to be that fast and relaxed, loving, an artist, I don't know, learn to play the ukulele or whatever is important to you. I think that's the next evolution. And Musk wants it. Musk talks about it. That has not been, and in pockets it exists. Making that be the norm, the universal truth, the thing that scales out is the opportunity. So that if we encountered the alien race of the Musk companies, if they landed, that we would like them and we would want to be a part of them, right? Instead of just being terrified.
Okay, I have two related questions to think about that for a second. Number one, do you think, and I'm on the autism spectrum as well, so I'm identifying myself, but Elon has said that he is, and I think, at least for one who recognizes another, I was like, well, yeah, duh. Do you think that has something to do with the company culture of that a little bit intense?
100%.
Or is it something totally different?
100%. Okay. And I think one recognizes another, as you said. I like the way you said that. I think there's some truth in it. That's a lot of why I found a home there so naturally. I've not been professionally assessed, but I believe I'm actually pretty far along the spectrum. I'd actually like to be assessed to know if that's true, but I think so. Self-assessment, the internet self-assessments show that I'm far up.
Admittedly, I've taken several of those like 100-question tests and I'm like way off. But anyway, but I have not had a doctor, a psychologist actually sit down with me. So,
well, then
partially just because I'm far too old for that to have happened. In the 70s, there were no people who had, you couldn't have Asperger's. That was not a thing. So, but anyway, continue on. Yeah.
Yes. So if you can have a more objective view, you being, well, also you, John, if you can have a more objective view of the pros and cons of a situation, it's much easier to apply first principles thinking, even under fire, even under perceived pressure. And one hallmark of this type of thinking is you feel pressure differently for very different reasons. Loud noises give you pressure, it depends. There's many different permutations, but someone yelling at you might be invisible, right? It just completely, it's like a song. And some songs might freak you out, right? So, I mean, what you hear, what you experience can be non-standard, right? Can be on the spectrum. It can be non-standard. And I think that allows different thinking, and in some cases, first principles thinking in places where other humans would have, it would be completely impossible to, in that situation, be thinking from on a 1,000-year time horizon. Like imagine you're financially responsible for the stock price of Tesla, and you have multiple SEC probes, depending on the timing, and NHTSA and IHS criticisms and government lobbying against you, and you're thinking on a 1,000-year time horizon.
Right.
I think that's a product. Now, when Musk talks about scaling consciousness among the stars, it's not always human consciousness. Musk is deep into the concept of consciousness, and the work at Tesla, it's not some secret side project, is also very much how to make an ML stack that thinks like Elon. And not just Elon, already the hive mind of other people and other ML stacks that are currently operating the company, because it's not a cult of one. Elon's super involved, but it's not only Elon. There's this whole ecosystem. Well, a lot of what is going on is to make that ecosystems, Elon calls it his hive mind or the hive mind, to make that more reproducible, more visible, more in effect. And that is ultimately the next great good of Tesla, after just hardcore excellent manufacturing competency, which the Musk companies have really well. Next is, I think this digital self-management, and then the symbiote to talk to it quickly through Neuralink is likely the next huge, awesome thing.
Cool. And the second related question actually had to do with the Tesla bot and whether you thought that would relieve some of that, but it sounds like that's just going to be the evolution of all of this. I personally I think about 1,000 years out too, but I personally feel that humans are not going to go very far off the planet, and it will be our silicone or whatever children that will do that. Because that is so much easier. That you can design a creature that is built for space. You can design a creature. Once you learn how to think and we understand what consciousness is, we can replicate that. And I also agree with Elon Musk that perhaps general AI might be humanity's last major invention. After that, it'll be them. They'll be inventing all the stuff.
Well,
so
COVID gave an interesting example for us to think through, John, and I think you might enjoy this. So if you look at the concept, and in some cases it's been proven, and in some cases it's theorized, of self-domestication, where some species choose to domesticate themselves into an ecosystem. And some theories are that cats self-domesticated to be less wild and easier to be around farming cultures. That one's not known 100%, but there are many proven cases of self-domestication. And a case that was likely self-domestication, but in any case, it's creating multicellular organisms. Why would these organisms choose to live forever inside each other? And in fact, optimized to the point where they can't live outside each other. And so you have your Golgi apparatus, et cetera. I mean, those were descended from independent living, free organisms, but they chose to never leave. Well, anyway, it is now the case that their DNA cannot survive outside this ecosystem. Well, then the narrative of big history, which is the thing I love maybe even more than hardcore history, and it's a history starting from the Big Bang and then including sociology and then it goes to geology and physics. When did the weak nucleic force evolve? And it goes through present human level history and then goes back out to the lifetime of the stars as one continuum, as one timeline. It is my favorite history course.
Okay. I actually don't know that one, so I'm going to have to go and get on that. Yeah. something to do.
Yeah. I have the big history timeline from Big Bang, and like there's the French Revolution as this tiny little sliver to when the stars burn out as a 3-meter long wall in my gym, in my gym. So I lived there. And I keep that in wow, that was good context to have in mind while I was like working on my quads or whatever, right?
Just remember that it's the scale of it is really small in the grand scheme of things.
Wow, this is in the greater scheme of things. Well, so what COVID did is, if you think of what big history proposes, is there's a trend towards densification of certain means of thinking, problem solving, and production. And a natural step is the idea of cities. And if you measure the information flows, they are a new feature in the landscape of time, having this much capability, decision-making, production in this densified space. That is a new phenomenon. From oceans full of plankton to now there's this, and it seems to be increasing the capability to innovate and further compacting. And many people intuitively feel this is one of the forms of progress. Okay, so if that is one of the timeline trends, and that's an if, that's a conjecture that big history makes, and I really like it. And you can measure it, actually. They propose measuring schemes. It's pretty cool. And they actually show the timeline of it, and it's like measured. It's pretty cool. And Wait But Why has some thinking that's collaborative when they talk about when you put things in a space and what is the density currently of different accomplishments, achievements, capabilities. Well, a next level is, what if you never or rarely leave your house? What if you become the Golgi apparatus of your apartment building or your home? And then if you want to put humanity out into space or in Mars or environments that are wetware, didn't evolve to cope with well, so you need a protective shell. What would a city be that's efficiently dense enough that it meets our current or near future technology to make, and then we can catapult it among the stars? So if you wanted, to your point, if you wanted, but so wetware can go along for the ride, humans can go along for the ride. What would make you never want to leave the cell? What would make you want to be a Golgi apparatus? What would make you never want to leave your house? And then suddenly COVID happened, and a lot of cultures were told, don't leave your house. And people were like, well, what does dating mean? What does human interaction mean? And we had all types of second, third, fourth, N level effects as we tried to navigate that. And it's definitely not fully navigated. No. But what an interesting experiment towards densification. And then trying to still have some levels of creativity, production, innovation. And I was working at Tesla during COVID. So we were in all these suits right when it landed, when we really knew the least about it. And when regulation was the most volatile, although that's hard to say, it continues to be volatile. But at a time when regulation was extremely volatile, can Tesla operate? Can Tesla not operate? That's right when I was joining.
Wow.
It was an interesting time and continues to be an interesting time. So you have this idea of densification even in physical production. How does the factory become more dense in a safe way? Because now things like communicable diseases are a first-person citizen. One, because one emerged that has a near distance transmission, we think. And Two, because when you're that dense, suddenly this is an issue. I mean, livestock farms, when you have chicken farms where chickens are in battery cages stacked on top, have different scenarios of disease propagation than free range. Okay.
Right.
So this happens. Well, according to the big history timeline, that is the natural thing. And according to spreading the light of consciousness out among the stars, I wonder if there isn't a very pleasant culture that may evolve where you've got your 3 meter by 3 meter by 3 meter life forever, and dating and DNA and art are different. And in some way, to some personality types, more satisfying, or else people would not opt in. Why would you self-domesticate into this? And we're seeing some of that. Some people in COVID are like, this is the best I've ever had. Some people, right? So we may have the emergence of humanity 2.0.
Right. Okay. I could see that. And it's yeah, like you're saying, you're seeing a self-selection going on. Or maybe not self-selection, it's a natural selection, not in the terms of like people dying, but there are people who've adjusted much better and have become more productive during this than and some people have just fallen off the rails. You know, and it's the crapshoot of genetics and personality, I guess. It's like some people just take to it better. So
well, and not that one is the right answer.
Right.
But
yeah, exactly.
It's enabling diversification potentially among the stars, which is how life works. Then if a solar flare sterilizes Earth, that's then where the tragic natural selection happens. Only the ones who opted into one are still around. But if that doesn't happen, you then have speciation, which is awesome. I mean, over a significant duration, unless we self-edit. Meanwhile, Musk is working on mRNA. So
yeah, he's got his fingers in a lot of stuff that I think people don't realize he's got his fingers in. So
if you think on a 1,000-year horizon, it's necessary. So, I mean, it's a very straightforward work back plan.
Right. Well, and I mean, I'm not going to put anything in his, not going to make him say this because people will get upset about that. But, you know, if we're going to colonize a place like Mars, it's going to be an awful lot easier to remake ourselves rather than remake the planet. So, or maybe some combination of both. But you know, so that's why I said I don't want to say, because people will be like, oh my gosh, he's messing with humans. But I'm saying that, not him. But I could see someone like him saying something like that. So,
or like you said, potentially the bots going out there.
Right.
What I really dig is Musk clearly works on radical revolutions and talks about them very stepwise, very pragmatic. In a way, Musk is the most honest engineer. And in a way, Musk is the best PR. When Musk talks about Neuralink, Musk talks about the actual near-term engineering possibility. Like, you might have communication wirelessly with your phone, and people are like, why would you like that? And so what's the early useful application? And Musk says quadriplegics might have some increased capability. And that is what the next version is for. Now, drawing the timeline out, it does all kinds of cool things, but that's not what Musk talks about. And as I will characterize Musk as a very honest engineer, it makes the best PR. Currently, this is a system to aid people with dramatic loss of capacity and severe damage or non-standard orientation of their spinal column. And that near term, that's what an honest engineer should talk about. But what's really fun is the trajectory is obvious, especially if you've consumed the Foundation series, which Musk talks about. And this is the trajectory. So yeah, it's all those cool things, but that's not what Musk talks about. And I love that.
Right. Very interesting. Wow. And I love the fact that he's so well read too. I actually just, when the Disney, or not Disney, Apple TV Foundation thing came out, I went back and reread all the books before that. But anyway, so it's a recent do. But yeah, I mean, it's just the fact that he's also just that much of a Renaissance guy. He's an engineer, but he knows. So it was incredible. Who was he talking to? Oh, it was Dan Carlin. And they got them this whole thing about airplanes in World War II. And I was like, holy crap, he knows more about them than I do by like a long shot. And not saying I'm an expert on that, but I'm like, how does he have time to even know about all of this stuff, the different versions of the Mustang or whatever that they were building? It's crazy.
I remember when I was founding Wikispeed, well, actually when Wikispeed was full on, so this is 2010, maybe early, like maybe March of 2010. I mean, we were full on. And I was working for Bill Gates at the time. I was at the Bill and Melinda French Gates Foundation. I was a Scrum Master. And our backlog was like, how do we deploy more rotavirus vaccine and that kind of thing? Those were our agile projects. So there was software involved, but already it was outside software primarily. And I was given a tremendous amount of leeway and flexibility to work Wikispeed because it was viewed as relatively on the same mission as the Bill and Melinda French Gates Foundation. And unfortunately, I had not yet learned a lot of lessons about sustainable pace. So I was definitely not sleeping enough. And I remember walking into one of the kitchenettes to get some high protein snack or something to try to fuel. And I was a little bit bleary-eyed. And some other people in there were, and this is another interesting scenario. My memory is a third person view, which is actually very often in my life. I don't know, maybe that is part of the way I think, but yeah, I'm not using these so much. I'm like reconstructing the scene from hearing and seeing and touching things, but that's my life. So I enter the kitchen. My memory is actually looking top down at the whole kitchen at once, like about where these fuzzy people are. And I'm not looking, so I don't even really know who they are. But they're talking about the Super Bowl or some huge sporting event, because it was March, I think. And I didn't know that was going on. It was completely outside. And they knew all about it. They knew all about the players. They knew about their histories. They knew about who was doing what, where they came from, the pressures they were experiencing. And I remember thinking, humans are awesome. If only they would think about making 100-mile-per-gallon cars with me, I would really, like, if they knew as much about the brake-specific fuel consumption charts of all the internal combustion designs that are currently affordably producible in mass, we could have a really useful conversation and I could get through this block quickly. Clearly, their capacity can, but they're pointing it to this other thing. And sports are actually awesome, but largely I have no knowledge because I dump my brain somewhere else. I think the same thing would happen if you asked Elon about the college basketball trades. He'd be like, what? But if you ask Musk about World War II aviation engine development, that helps you understand through corollary how to do better rocket development. It earns space in your time. And human capability to go deep in many topics is well proven. It's just we often do it for entertainment. Well, if your entertainment is combustion technology for rockets, you can know a lot about it. And people do all the time. And other people know just as much about all the Disney princesses. And that's awesome. It is. And it shows what humans can do. I remember about the same time seeing a YouTube of a person who built a replica of Coney Island in, I think, their basement out of glued toothpicks. Like with working roller coasters and everything. It was really good. I mean, it went a little bit viral because it was just so detailed and awesome. And the level of effort was phenomenal. And I do applaud that. But I was thinking, man, I wish that person had worked in Wikispeed instead, because clearly they know how to dedicate themselves to something at detail for long duration. Kudos. And that is awesome. And I am entertained, and many people are. But man, if I weigh the value of the advent of 100-mile-per-gallon safe transportation for 4 adults with ultra low emissions, I mean, art is important, but let's make something worth creating beautiful. On my deathbed, if I say, but at least I made the Coney Island replica, I will not be satisfied. I won't be. But if on my deathbed, I say, like, I made some dent in the human condition toward the best I understood as positive,
Right.
Sweet success.
Right. Yeah. Well, and this is one of the reasons, not to get too much of a downer, but the whole thing about population collapse, one of the things
And
that
not to
happens
make too much of a downer, but the whole thing about population. John, you are phenomenal.
But there's obviously the whole problem. There's a much bigger problem. But one thing that really keeps me up at night is the fact that we need 7+ billion people on the planet to produce one Elon Musk.
Yeah.
It's like we need a lot of people. And so that is one reason to expand out to other places, because we can have more people. And the more people we have, the more chance we have of someone bubbling to the top. Because, and it takes nothing away. I mean, it's great. If people know Disney princesses, that's awesome.
That is awesome.
But there's not going to be that many people who are that into World War II airplane engine designs. But it's critical that somebody's interested in that, because it's going to give them a perspective,
Well, it's the idea someone has to build the rocket, and then everybody can take the ride, right? Well, and it's, do you want only the people who built the rocket to be the people who take the ride? No, because then you have a strange colony that maybe is not terribly comfortable, which comes back to my earlier point. So I think a useful outcome of my life is to try to replicate the Tesla speed of innovation in something that's really compatible with a loving family life, whatever that means. I mean, maybe the idea of family life is different then, but a loving family life and a artistic expression, a beautiful expression. There's a lot of wonderful experiences in the plant, animal, and human experiences that should continue. How to make that not at odds with, or not when you're not working, but part of the working. Right. Part of what makes Elon so effective is Elon doesn't stop. Elon doesn't take vacation. So the goal, I think, is how do you never stop work, but include kids if you have kids in a loving, useful way that's good for both of you. Include pets, include plants, include stewardship, include many species. How do you make that not slow you down when you never work? The idea of a 9 to 5 is, I think, not needed soon. One, because of potentially universal basic income, maybe potentially the Tesla bot, better AI. That's one. But also because it's so much more effective to never stop. And people who love sports can never stop thinking about sports all day. It's fine. So that the idea of never stopping thinking about something, developing something, is fine. So how do you make that compatible with these other awesome human experiences? And I hope that's what Joe Justice helps bring to the world.
I think that's a good wrap up for everything. And we've been talking for an hour and a half now, so geez. But that's what I try to impress to my own children, actually, is they're like, what should I do for a living when I'm an adult? I'm like, what are you passionate about? The thing that makes me the saddest is when I meet someone who has no passion. They're just like, whatever. I'm like, I don't care what, even if it is Disney princesses, go for it, or build the Coney Island roller coaster thing. As long as you have a passion, it's going to make your life better, because you will. You'll think about it when you're going to sleep. You'll think about it when you wake up. And therefore, if it so happens to be a car or something, then you're going to make better cars, because you won't be doing this. Oh, I'm clocking in, I'm clocking out, I'm done. Not going to think about it till tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. That seems like a less valuable life. So yeah, there we go. What are we giving life coaching lessons to everybody now? So there you go, kids.
John, you are clever, insightful, well-trained, well-experienced, charming, friendly. Man, what an honor for me that you thought I was interesting enough to consume 90 minutes of your time.
Oh, man.
I will say I loved and enjoyed this enough that I'd love to do it again. And actually, what I'd like to do is compose a list of questions for back at you.
Cool. Absolutely. Let's do it. We'll do a reverse interview.
and turn the table around.
Yeah.
And if it ever makes sense, pandemically and geographically, for us to have a coffee or beer together, depending on time of day, man, I'd love that too.
I would
Thank you,
absolutely.
John.
You're in Hawaii right now, right? By the way, jealous because it's 0 centigrade outside right now. So, but
I grew up in a really cold small town. I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, and it gets all the
right.
lake effects now and really, really cold. It was a dream.
Yeah,
of
like I said,
mine
Cleveland,
being-
Ohio, South Bend, Indiana, we have like some connection there. So,
Well, and I did spend quite a bit of time in Cleveland, but it's a bigger city. So I think South Bend was a little bit behind. So my point, part of my point is I think your experience growing up was slightly more modern and ended up being almost identical to my experience growing up just a few years later, because I think that's the larger city, smaller town dynamic.
cool. Well, anyway, I should be the one thanking you for being an amazing person, and you are absolutely. And I appreciate that you spent all this time with me. I really do. And I really appreciate that we got to talk about Tesla, but I really, really appreciate that we got to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff too. So, yeah, thank you again so much. And, I guess ask questions. We'll continue this conversation. It'll be awesome. So
you can find me at www.abi-agile.com. That's where I work. So yes, do please help me earn a living. Please do.
Right.
I did write a book called Scrum Master. I'm super proud of it. Yeah, I think it will improve. It's already on version 1.19F, and it gets a new version on average about once a week. So it keeps developing.
So I like this, the Agile book. Nice. That's great.
Some people who bought the first copy, the information is all right. It is all correct. I'm very proud of the information. The writing style is junk. It's very hard to read. So I'm so grateful to the first people who bought version 1. But it's much easier to read now, and it keeps getting easier to read. And even it gets updates. Now, some of my experiences at Tesla are starting to appear in each chapter now, all throughout. So do consider the book. And I'm very active on Twitter. So if there's anything you want to tell me, correct that I said, update me, or if you have something you want to ask me, I have a nearly 100% response rate on Twitter. I'm at Joe Justice. Please also tag John so you can get both our points of view, which would be way more fun.
That'll be we'll have an interesting conversation. And of course, I'll put all of that in the link, at the bottom of the video so that people can find it all in a single place. And yeah, there you go. So again, thank you so much. And, we'll continue this. I hope this will be the first of like a bunch of we'll call it conversations rather than interviews. So that'll be perfect.
That's the dream. All right. Let's enjoy it. Thank you, John.
Thank you. All righty. Take care. Bye-bye.